between the lawless actions of the Trump administration and the people attempting to defend American democracy. This afternoon, the Trump administration was in a federal court fighting a lawsuit from the state of California over the military presence on the streets of L.A. without the approval of the governor. Now, we're awaiting a ruling on that case that could come at any minute. And to address all this, Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, held a press conference in California where, frankly, she spoke like the leader of an occupying force in the American city of Los Angeles.
The Department of Homeland Security and the officers and the agencies and the departments and the military people that are working on this operation will continue to sustain and increase our operations in this city. We are not going away. We are staying here to liberate this city from the socialist and the burdensome leadership that this governor and that this mayor have placed on this country and what they have tried to insert into this city.
Liberate the city from the socialist leadership? Those comments kind of give away the whole game, don't they? This is a politically driven, ideologically driven military operation in the state of California. They're not even talking about the pretext of some civil disturbance, some desire to restore order. No, they think they should be greeted as liberators. And those comments, which again show what they're really up to, not there to keep the peace, not there for civil order, no, there to occupy L.A. against its elected government. That would be the headline from that news conference were it not for what happened just immediately after. Because as it would happen, California's Democratic Senator Alex Padilla was in the same building as Secretary Noem's press conference for an unrelated meeting. So he went to ask the secretary a question, and then this happened.
Guys, ready? And Bell. Sir, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the secretary because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your
I also want to
hands up.
How many of our ICE agents have been docked?
On the ground. Hands behind your back. Hands behind your back.
If you let my hands go, it's right behind my back.
All right. Cool. One hand. Lay flat. Lay flat.
Other hand, sir. Other hand.
There's no recording allowed out here.
I did not know.
There's no recording allowed out here per FBI, right? For the building.
So what, I'm sorry?
There's no recording allowed out here.
That's my boss. I have to
There's no
record
recording
everything
allowed
for
out
her.
here. You can record. There's no recording allowed out here.
I'm not a member
There's
of
no
this.
recording allowed.
I understand that, sir, but
There's no recording allowed. Yeah, well, that's my boss, the U.S. Senator that you guys have on the ground with his hands behind his back. A sitting U.S. Senator forced to the ground and handcuffed for trying to exercise the most basic form of congressional oversight of the executive branch at a press conference.
I will say this. If this is how this administration responds to a senator with a question, if this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community and throughout California and throughout the country. We will hold this administration accountable.
Now, I think in a normal administration, or not this administration, if something like this were to happen because of, charitably a mix-up, right, a misunderstanding, the people at the time didn't realize it was a senator, it would be a mortifying event, and there would be apologies. Of course, that's not what happened here. What happened here is that Secretary Noem responded by outright lying about what happened.
This man burst into the room, started lunging towards the podium, interrupting me and elevating his voice, and was stopped, did not identify himself, and was removed from the room. So as soon as he identified himself, appropriate actions were taken.
That's just not true. We can all see it in the video when he says, I am the U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, right? Senator Padilla. He did identify himself. We all heard it. It's recorded on tape. Now, an hour ago, Jacob Soboroff got the first chance to speak with Senator Padilla in an exclusive interview, and he asked him about Noem's charge. First question, how are you? We all watched the video. We saw you taken to the floor by those agents. How are you doing?
Yeah, look, I'm okay. I've been on the phone off and on with kids, right? Because my kids, travels fast in this day and age with technology to make sure they're okay. But I think most importantly is the outrage that I hope people feel. If this can happen to a United States senator for having the audacity to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the same questions for and requests for information that we've had, not just the last sort of week or so of the activity in Los Angeles, but since the beginning of the administration, then just imagine what can happen to anybody in the country, for that matter.
We heard from you briefly at the press conference after you came outside of the federal building in Westwood. We've heard more extensively from Secretary Noem and the Department of Homeland Security, and I want to just tell you a little bit, because I'm sure this has been a whirlwind, about what they've been saying. Secretary Noem said that you, quote, lunged towards her at this press conference. The Department of Homeland Security said the Secret Service believed that you were an attacker, and the Department of Homeland Security called this political theater. What's your response, and what's your version of what happened?
Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. It's a lie, but par for the course for this administration, right? So here's the stage. Look, I was in the federal building here in Los Angeles for a scheduled briefing. Just as when my colleagues and I had to go all the way to Guantanamo Bay to begin to get information about that facility being used as a detention facility, they've been non-responsive to requests for information. And so I had scheduled, they approved a briefing with representatives of the Northern Command in that federal building. We were there prior to the 10:30 original appointment date when we caught wind that Secretary of Homeland Security is going to be down the hall at a press conference. And our briefing was now delayed because of that press conference. So since the Secretary has been non-responsive, I figured let me go over and listen to what she has to say. Maybe we can glean some information here.
So let me make sure I understand that. Go ahead.
So the whole time, right? We're the whole time being escorted in this federal building by somebody from the National Guard, somebody from the FBI. I've gone through screening. This is a federal building. And so tell them, let's go listen to the press conference. They escort me over to that room. And I'm sitting in the back of the room behind the cameras, behind the reporters, listening. And at one point, it was just too much to take. Not the first, but the second attack on the political leadership of California and this notion that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem had to come in and rescue the people of Los Angeles from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. It was too much. And so I spoke up. I introduced myself. And said I had a question. Look, they said I wasn't wearing my pin. My polo says United States Senate. There was no threat. There was no lunging. I raised my voice to ask a question, and it took, maybe half a second before multiple agents were on me.
The video clearly shows, and you can hear on the audio, that you identify yourself as Senator Padilla. She said you barged into the room, or you basically broke into the room. I'm paraphrasing here. Just set the record straight on that.
Yeah, no, I didn't barge into the room. As I mentioned, I was in a different conference room, a couple doors down the hall. I let it be known I'd like to go listen to the press conference. The folks that were escorting me in the building walked me over. I didn't even open the door. The door was open for me. And I spent a few minutes in the back of the room just listening in until the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, got to be too much to take. So I spoke up.
Have you seen the video yet? Well, you can look here, Senator. Have you actually watched it yourself? When you watch this, and let's go through this together. Describe to me what you're seeing. What's happening here?
Yeah, again, well, multiple people forcibly removing from the room. I know I was trying to do two things at once, try to get my question out while trying not to lose my balance. They first asked me to, get down on my knees. Like, growing up where I grew up, you know what happens if you don't obey law enforcement. And so I began to go on my knees to the extent that they would let me, because they were literally handling me at the same time. And it went from getting on their knees to flat on the floor, which I tried, but wasn't able to easily because of the folks handling me. They put handcuffs on me. So yes, I was handcuffed.
These are FBI agents. Did they tell you who they were?
They wouldn't identify themselves. And I kept repeatedly asking themselves, why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Then they get me back up on my feet. And we start walking. Don't tell me where we're going.
You were reports that you met with Secretary Noem for 15 minutes after the press conference was over.
So this is a little surreal. So they took the handcuffs off. The person that came over said, well, if you'd like to meet with the secretary, you can do so after the press conference is over. Sure, I've been dying to get information from the department for months. I'll take this opportunity and see what I can glean. Then I was asked, but the other briefing that you're here for, the previously scheduled briefing, would you still like that briefing? Of course, that's why we came. That one never happened because the representatives from Northern Command left and again, didn't give us an excuse. So hoped for another opportunity to learn from them. Like, again, what's the mission of the National Guard here? What training have what's normally state National Guard is now federalized National Guard service women and men, if they're going to be out in communities, if they're going to be interfacing with civilians. This is not a normal job for them. And by the way, they're being taken away from other critical missions in the state of California to do this function. Now we hear the Marines are coming. For what purpose? What's the mission? What type of training preparation have they had?
Did you get answers to any of these questions?
None. And so, again, did have an opportunity to sit with Secretary Noem for a few minutes. You know, you think she might have started the meeting with an apology of what happened. Of course not. And so I began to ask the question I was trying to ask in the press conference. For all the touting of the Trump administration of going after violent criminals, I told her, there's no disagreement there. If that's all you were doing, there would be no debate, there would be no discussion. But what's happening in reality is far different than that, because we hear story after story after story of non-violent migrants who, many are working in very essential jobs for our economy, being rounded up. But the cruelty with which they're doing this, the increased cruelty with which they're doing this, escalating here in Los Angeles over the course of the last week. You don't need flashbangs, you know, when you're trying to target one person. National Guard over, not at the request of a governor. It hasn't happened since 1965. And so, of course, they're instigating, trying to create the response and a reaction from community, and will point to anything to further escalate the situation. It's wrong, and it's counterproductive.
Senator Padilla, we're here on my colleague Ari Melber's program, The Beat, on MSNBC, and I know Ari wants to ask you a question. Ari, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, and thanks to the Senator for joining us. You've now described the incident here for the first time. Do you view it as excessive force? As Jacob referenced, the administration is saying they were trying to basically do safety or security. Do you view it as excessive force or an effort to intimidate the opposition party?
Look, personally, I think it was excessive. I was in no way, lunging or threatening in any way. Again, consider where we were, in a secure federal building. I was being escorted. So definitely an overreaction, uncalled for, but it's not about me. Again, this is the biggest point. It's not about me. If they're willing to do this to me, a United States senator representing the state of California, just to imagine how it's going with their immigration enforcement on the streets when they show up at restaurants and are trying to detain a cook, or outside a Home Depot trying to detain a day laborer, or on the fields in Oxnard a couple of days ago detaining farm workers. You can just imagine. But that's the tone and approach that this administration has chosen to take. In many cases, I'm convinced it's unlawful and unconstitutional, and I have to do my job as a senator to insist on information and accountability and the rule of law.
And of course, Senator Padilla of California, who was forced to the ground, handcuffed today when he tried to ask a question of Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Now, we have a lot of breaking news happening this evening. I want to just sort of bring you up to speed. We are getting reports from the Middle East, where the defense minister in Israel has just addressed the nation, saying that Israel has launched a preemptive strike on Iran and are now expecting retaliation of some form. We also have reports of explosions outside Tehran and northeast Tehran. We are monitoring that, and we're going to get you up to speed on that. At the same time, we are waiting on that. We are also waiting at any moment a possible court ruling from a federal district judge about the challenge the state of California has brought to the nationalization of the National Guard and its deployment in that state. And I want to bring in now Rob Bonta, who is the Attorney General of California, who is a party to that lawsuit. Mr. Attorney General, it's good to have you on. You had a hearing today in front of a federal Judge Breyer, in which the state argued that it was an unlawful deployment. What did you think of the hearing today?
Thanks for having me again, Chris. We felt the hearing went positively. We came in feeling good about the legal arguments we made and the factual record as we had submitted it to the court. We had received an opposition from the federal government that we were able to provide a reply to and rebut their arguments. And during the court hearing today, the judge seemed receptive to many of our arguments. It didn't seem particularly receptive to a number of the federal government's arguments. So we came away feeling hopeful. The judge didn't indicate issue a ruling from the bench at the hearing, but said he would issue one later today. So we have some members of my team pressing refresh pretty frequently on the court docket website.
One of the points made by your attorneys, I think, in a filing was a posting to the Department of Homeland Security showing basically uniformed, I think, National Guardsmen at some enforcement site where ICE is doing a kind of deportation raid. And the point that you're making there, and I think this relates to what happened to the senator from your state, which I'm going to ask about in a moment, is they are doing the thing that they are legally supposed to be prescribed from doing. They are engaged in policing activity in violation of the law and in violation of the legal justification they themselves gave for the National Guard deployment. Is that the argument you're making?
Yeah, we have sort of two main arguments, and one of them is that the authority that the president relies on for deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles does not give him that authority. It requires the existence of a rebellion or an invasion or the inability of the federal government to execute the laws of the United States. None of those are present. It also, in addition, requires the governor to cooperate. And then with respect to the Marines, they cannot engage as a military entity in any civilian law enforcement. So we're asking that such conduct be prohibited.
What did you think about what happened to the senator from your state, Senator Padilla, at that press conference today with Secretary Noem?
Look, a U.S. senator posing questions as a senator to the secretary, doing his job, has been accused of lunging and charging and attacking the secretary. I mean, the shamelessness has no bounds. The gaslighting, no bounds. And then they went immediately to force. They shoved him. They took him to the ground. They handcuffed him. They detained him. When he's a U.S. senator, a sitting U.S. senator from my state, asking a question on behalf of his constituents to the secretary, it's completely shameful. It is a disgrace. It is unacceptable, and it's wrong, and it should never have happened. And it is unfortunately something that is not surprising, although definitely shocking when it comes to this administration.
Final question for you. I was very struck by the words the Secretary of Homeland Security used today, in which her explanation of the presence of all the federal agencies, including the National Guard and the military, she said, was not to reassert civil order, but rather to liberate the city from the socialists and poor leadership of it. Do you think that is a reasonable or legal justification for the presence of armed troops in your state?
Absolutely not. This idea of liberating, I think she used the word socialist in there as well, was very political and partisan in her attacks on Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass. And, you know, this is an administration that has just a very difficult and complicated relationship with the law and the facts. And following the law is not their strong suit. And describing the facts accurately, not their strong suit either. This is another example of that. There is no justification for military being deployed to liberate Los Angeles. Period. Full stop. End of story. And whatever Secretary Noem's nonsense was that she was spewing from that podium, it seemed to be a little too much for Senator Padilla, who needed to speak up on behalf of his constituents. And speaking up and speaking out is important. And showing up and showing out, important. Always do it peacefully, safely, and lawfully. But this is a time to call out the lawlessness of this administration and their misinformation and disinformation and propaganda campaign that seems to be running on overdrive 24/7.
All right, Attorney General Rob Bonta of California, whose staff and he will be refreshing to see when we get that decision handed down, which may actually enjoin or temporarily restrain the National Guard from being out in the streets of California, any one of the federal buildings. We will follow that story. I thank you for your time. And also, we are getting reports that Israel has launched preemptive airstrikes on Iran at this hour. Reuters reporting the Iranian state-run news service is saying explosions have been heard in the northeast part of Tehran. That's, of course, the country's capital. And Israel's defense minister has confirmed the strikes, saying, following the state of Israel's preemptive strike against Iran, a missile and drone attack against the state Israel and its civilian population is expected in the immediate future. Now, there has been reporting over the last few days about the possibility of such a strike, and we should probably talk about the context here. The Israeli government is nearing the possibility of internal collapse over political problems within the coalition. There has been a lot of noise made by the Netanyahu government and the Israelis of a possible strike on Iran, as the Trump administration has sent the envoy, Steve Witkoff, to the region to negotiate some kind of deal. In fact, Witkoff is headed to the region this weekend. There were plans talked for this weekend. A lot of folks thought, given the fact that Trump's own envoy was headed to the region for continuing talks or possibility of some kind of diplomatic deal between the U.S. and Iran about the Iranian nuclear program, that would forestall any Israeli action. That said, we have seen movements by the U.S. government, warnings issued by the State Department to evacuate people from embassies in the in sort of preparation for a strike such as this. Courtney Kuby is the senior NBC News correspondent covering national security in the Pentagon, and she joins me now. Courtney, what do we know about this? What do we know about this strike? I don't know if we have Courtney on the line quite yet. Of course, we should also note that there have been strikes by Israel on Iran before, and then there have been retaliatory strikes by Iran against Israel. Many of those have been essentially forestalled by the Iron Dome the U.S. government helps fund, which stops rocket fire from over Israel. We also have been hearing a long time the possibility of plans of a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. So just to sort of set the context here, there's a huge difference between strikes against military targets, things that have already happened over the last 6 months in this very tense and escalatory relationship between Iran and Israel, as well as Iran's, the difference between that and Iran's nuclear program. We are going to try to get Courtney Kuby on the line. We're going to go to break. We will hopefully have her on the other side. Just don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
A U.S. senator gets tackled, cuffed, and silenced for asking a question. This isn't just authoritarian overreach, it's full-blown fascism. When Senator Padilla is treated like a criminal while trying to hold DHS accountable, what hope does a farm worker or day laborer have? This is Trump's America, lawless, cruel, and unapologetically anti-democracy.
All right, we are following the breaking news out of the Middle East right now, in which the Israeli defense minister has alerted the nation to a set of what he called preemptive strikes against Iran. There have been explosions outside of Tehran, according to the Iranian state authorities. We do not know yet where these strikes have been, how widespread they are, what facilities they're focused on. There would be, in the eyes, I think, of the Iranian government, a big difference between military strikes like those we've seen from Israel over the past 6 months in this escalating exchange of warfare with Israel and Iran, and targeting the nuclear program. Targeting the nuclear program with a strike has long been something the Israeli government has been dead set on, and often been at odds with American administrations, including the Obama administration and the Biden administration. So I want to bring in now Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is a Democrat of Massachusetts. And Senator, when we started this program 29 minutes ago, I was going to speak to you about your colleague being wrestled to the ground and handcuffed, and I will speak to you about that. But this seems to be an possibly extraordinarily major development, depending on what happens. Yes. I know you probably don't know any more details than we do, but I want to get your reaction to the idea that the Israelis just launched a preemptive strike on Iran.
Right. This is deeply disturbing. And look, I don't agree often with the Trump administration, but I think here It is important to say we need more negotiation, we need de-escalation, we need to get to a deal. This has the possibility of spinning entirely out of control. So we need to get these parties back to a negotiating table. We need the administration in there helping try to negotiate something among them. This is truly, truly a dangerous situation.
I have to say, this morning I had stupidly and foolishly expressed confidence that this strike wouldn't happen today or tomorrow, because the president's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is headed to Oman, the region, for diplomatic talks this Sunday. I mean, this strikes me as a pretty shocking thing, given that context, for our ally Israel to do with the president's envoy headed to the region for diplomacy.
Right. You could not find a way for Benjamin Netanyahu to more aggressively say to Donald Trump, to the Trump administration, but to the people of the United States of America, I just don't care about you. I don't care that you are an ally. He wants to get out there and do what he wants to do. And he's just going to do it, even, as you rightly say, even with the envoy for negotiation already in the air and coming. He didn't even call and say, send the guy back. Don't send him here because I have other plans. So this is a way not only for Netanyahu to take on Iran, it's a way for Netanyahu to say to the whole rest of the world that this is not about alliances. This is not about de-escalation. This is about Netanyahu doing what Netanyahu wants to do. And ultimately, not only does that put the entire world at risk, it certainly puts the people of Israel at risk as well.
Yeah, we should note, of course, the Israeli defense minister warning that there's an expectation of retaliation through missile and drone attacks. We saw missile and drone attacks in previous exchanges between the two nations. And another question on this, in just context, again, because we are trying to get the details, and the details really matter here in terms of the scope of this. But the context here is that there was a deal with Iran. It was negotiated. It required monitoring of their enrichment capabilities. It limited their breakout time to get a weapon. That deal was negotiated by the Obama administration. It was agreed to, and it was ripped up by the first Trump administration, which has, it seems to me, brought us to this point. Do you think that ripping up that deal was a mistake?
Oh, I think it was a terrible mistake. And I said so at the time, as did many others, that we at least had some insight into, on a very regular basis, what Iran was up to. We had an agreement from Iran on what it would not do by way of enrichment. And as you say, we could get, we were able to see what the breakout period was, and to keep that breakout period long enough that there would be genuine warning. And when the Trump administration threw all that out the window, said, nope, don't want any part of that, we lost that capacity. We lost the inspections that Iran had agreed to. And that didn't make anybody safer. It certainly didn't make Israel safer. It didn't make the United States safer. It didn't make the world safer. It let Iran move within its own sphere and hide it from the rest of the world. And that's what's been unfolding. And I really do want to say I appreciate that the Trump administration now is trying to negotiate, but we could have been in a lot better position on this, and now we are seeing the consequences of the Trump administration burning down the original negotiations.
Senator, I'm definitely going to ask you about what happened today in California. I promise you, and I want to keep you if that's okay, but I also want to bring in my colleague Courtney Kuby, just because I want to bring us both up to speed on what's happening here. So Courtney Kuby is senior NBC News correspondent covering national security in the Pentagon. Courtney, just tell us what you've been able to find out about what's happened.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We still are working through the details about exactly what happened. We know now that there were airstrikes. We are working on whether it was limited to airstrikes, though, or whether there may have been other assets that were used in this. These strikes against Iran, we don't know if they have actually concluded at this point. We know that they started more than an hour ago. There are it is a multiple strike package. So why I bring that up is because as the rumors that something was likely to unfold in the coming days were growing stronger over the last 48 hours or so, we were hearing a lot of talk about the possibility of limited strikes. It still appears that is the case, but definitely multiple. The targets, we're still working on the details of that as well, but it is officials telling us that it's the kind of targets that we would expect. So that leads us to believe there may have been something that would in some way either disable or delay Iran's nuclear facilities or nuclear program. That is what Israel has been, their goal has been militarily with Iran for as long as I can remember. We do have confirmation from multiple U.S. officials that there was no U.S. military involvement or assistance. So why that's critical is we're talking about not U.S. military involvement when in the form of dropping bombs or anything, but no assistance means that the U.S. military also didn't do things like help them with aerial refueling.
Nuclear enrichment program, but it's not just that. Another key timeline that we should keep in mind right now is back in October, Israel took a series of very successful strikes in Iran. They largely disabled their strategic air defenses throughout the country. What that means is their S-300s and their coordinated air defense systems, they took out the radars, basically every one of their air defense systems, strategic air defenses, so the longer range ones, were disabled. Well, Iran can rebuild those, and it takes a matter of months. There's a very real possibility the Israelis were looking at this and saying, look, our window for being able to more safely conduct manned strikes, fly over Iran without our pilots having exponentially more danger in the mission, that window is closing. And that may have also factored in here.
Last question, then I'm going to let you go, Courtney, so you can go back to reporting this out. But just to be clear on this, when you say, there has been the threat of strikes on the nuclear facilities for a long time. I mean, literally over a decade. It's something that's been contemplated and warned. I've covered it for, again, over a decade. When you say, like you would have expected, my understanding from what I hear from you is there is we don't have a confirmed, but an expectation or anticipation that this might be what that is.
Yeah,
actually targeted at the nuclear facilities program.
Yes, and that it's an excellent point. But here's the one caution I would have about the possibility that Israel was really taking a massive series of strikes that would in some way dismantle or disable or even destroy Iran's nuclear facilities. Okay, that would be if it's Israel by themselves, okay, no other military participation, and specifically the U.S. military participation, that is most likely going to be a multi-day, possibly even a multi-week operation for them to do that. The Israeli nuclear facility, the Iranian nuclear facilities are buried deep underground. It would take things like a massive ordnance penetrator, a bunker buster, right, to go through, to take it out. That's not something that the Israelis could do quickly. What they could do is, and what they have proven they can do back in October, is show Iran that, we can take strikes right around your nuclear facilities. We will hold them at risk. We can do things like take out your air defenses. So what's still not clear is, was this more than hey, we're showing you we can still do this amidst these nuclear negotiations with the United States, or was this an attempt to further set the program back? But as far as actually a mission to completely destroy their nuclear facilities, it doesn't appear that's what this is here tonight.
All right, Courtney Kubi, that was incredibly useful, and thank you for doing your reporting. I will let you get back to it right now, and I'm going to turn back to you, Senator, and just what, again, the picture here is cloudy, but this is very high-stakes stuff. What do you want to see the U.S. government, which has, I think, burned a lot of bridges with a lot of parts of the world, doing in the wake of this?
So think of it this way, Chris. There are really two responses to Iran trying to develop a nuclear weapon. One is that we have negotiations. You try to find ways to offer Iran other ways to be part of the community of nations in return for not developing nuclear weapons. The alternative is military response. And Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear he wants a military response. I was thinking back as I was listening to Courtney just now. I think it was 2017. When I visited Israel, I was scheduled for a meeting with the then Prime Minister Netanyahu, supposed to be for about 15 minutes. It ended up running about an hour and a half. And the whole conversation, I kept saying, let's talk about Gaza. What's happening in Gaza? What are your plans in Gaza? What's happening to the people in Gaza? Benjamin Netanyahu didn't want to talk about that. What he wanted to talk about is there should be no negotiated deal for Iran. The only way to respond to Iran is militarily, and the United States should join Israel in a military response to the threat that Iran might develop its own nuclear weapon. Of course, we already had a negotiated deal. Benjamin Netanyahu didn't want any piece of that. It was all about a military response. And what we're seeing right now is the Trump administration seems very committed to negotiating with the parties and trying to get to a deal, which is the right place to be. The Trump administration seems committed to that, and Netanyahu has clearly just said, I'm not interested in what Donald Trump, what the United States of America wants. He's pursuing his own path, and that is militarily. And that puts Israel against Iran and isolated in the world.
It's a very scary moment for lots of people in the region, throughout Iran, of course, throughout Israel. We have pictures there, live pictures of Israel, of course. They have been through a lot of this. There's been incoming missiles launched by the Houthis over the last several weeks that have been intercepted by Iron Dome. Of course, military operations continue in Gaza, which has been an absolute sort of incomprehensible level of human misery. I think we have all seen that also continues at this moment. I have you here, and I do want to ask you about what happened this morning. We're showing pictures of Iran and Tel Aviv. We're showing the map. This morning, a U.S. senator who tried to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security was shoved, manhandled, pushed to the ground, handcuffed. There was no apology forthcoming from the administration. They lied about what he did, saying he didn't identify. And I saw U.S. senators, this is one of your own. What's your reaction to this, and how big a deal does it feel like to you? Is this, it was a mistaken identity, they didn't know, they were following their training, or does this feel like something bigger?
No, this is bigger than that. I mean, first you have to focus on why was Senator Padilla handcuffed? He was handcuffed for asking a question. He was handcuffed for doing his job as a senator. You know, you've got to remind everyone, what's our job? Our job in the Senate is to do legislation, to do the nominations, and to conduct oversight. And oversight is about asking hard questions, questions that are uncomfortable. Look, I've done a fair amount of that myself. And I've done it in Democratic administrations and Republican administrations because that is my job. In the Constitution, Congress has a job, and part of it is oversight about how any administration is enforcing the law. So there's Alex Padilla, the senator from California. He represents the people of Los Angeles. We've watched what's happening in Los Angeles, what Donald Trump is doing, possibly not legally, bringing in the National Guard, bringing in the Marines. And so Alex Padilla is there. We've got the head of Homeland Security who wants to come out to California, the person who's in charge of ICE, who's in charge of these escalating efforts that ICE has been using on civilian populations, snatching people off the streets here in Massachusetts, lurking outside elementary schools in California. So she's there to take credit for what's going on. They're having a press conference. Cameras are rolling. And Alex Padilla wants to ask a question, and he gets thrown to the floor and handcuffed for it. And then the Trump administration just wants to gaslight everybody and somehow try to blame the senator for that. All I can say is anyone who isn't already convinced that the Trump administration is trying to undermine free speech in this country, trying to shut down anyone who doesn't agree with Donald Trump and doesn't bend a knee to Donald Trump, anyone who doesn't believe that that's what the Trump administration is doing, needs to watch that video of Senator Padilla being wrestled to the ground and handcuffed simply for trying to ask a question. That's why this is a big deal. So a lot of Democratic senators have stood up and said, enough. I want to hear where the Republican senators are. Because anyone in the position that Donald Trump is in who is willing to do this with a senator and back it up, Kristi Noem in there ready to back up and no apology, try to defend herself and lie about what happened. Anyone who's willing to do that is willing to do it to you, to anyone else in this country. It is time for Republican senators to speak up. We need an independent investigation of this. It is time also for Kristi Noem to resign. She needs to resign.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, you've been incredibly generous and gracious with your time tonight on an extremely busy night, and it's been excellent to have your insight here. So I really appreciate you joining the program tonight. Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right. Ben Rhodes served as Deputy National Security Advisor for President Obama, and he joins me now. And Ben, this is something that has lurked as a specter over U.S. policy, over Middle Eastern policy, U.S.-Israeli relationship, over the world, literally for years. Since you were working in the National Security Council, we still don't know the details. What is your initial read on the fact this is happening right now with Steve Witkoff headed to the region for talks on Sunday?
Chris, it's actually extraordinary timing. I mean, there's no reason for this to be happening right now. I mean, we should just say that. The reality is the Trump administration, at least what they've told us, is that they would prefer to resolve this diplomatically. And they have an ongoing process in which they appear to be getting close to a deal. And Steve Witkoff is slated to meet with the Iranians in Oman tomorrow. And you have this strike tonight. Now, either the Trump administration has just been completely humiliated by Bibi Netanyahu undermining that diplomacy, or the Trump administration was completely lying to us and the world. There's not another way of calculating this and say this. This is totally necessary because there was a nuclear deal that had the Iranian nuclear program rolled back, that had inspections that Trump tore up in the first place. And this shows you that on complex foreign policy matters, the consequences don't happen overnight. You don't tear up the nuclear deal that the Obama administration negotiated and have a war the next day, but you do sometimes have it a few years later. And we don't know what's going to happen next, but this opens up a Pandora's box, Chris, that could lead in all kinds of terrible directions for people, for U.S. interests, and for the entire world. And right now, we just don't know where this is going.
Yeah, one of the themes, I think, of the Trump second-term foreign policy is a kind of not my problem approach to a bunch of things. I mean, we saw it sort of with Russia and Ukraine, where there was like a little bit of effort to negotiate, and then it said, you just got to kind of let them do it. You know, the sort of approach to Israel has kind of been, we're neither going to restrain them nor really kind of help them. Like, we'll do what we got to do, they do what they got to do. That's kind of the perspective. And the reason I say that is because I want to read you the statements from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which kind of captures that ethos here. This is the Secretary of State of the United States saying, tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces and remain in close contact with our regional partners. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. What do you make of that statement?
It's an incredible statement of weakness by the United States of America. We're just passive bystanders to Israel, a country that we give billions and billions and billions of dollars in military aid to, that they just took the strike without notifying us or without us being a part of it? How weak is this administration, Chris? And we have to start calling this out. You know, look at what's happened since Trump took office. This is what I was worried about, that Trump's own approach to politics in the world would be a de facto permission slip to everybody around the world to do whatever they want. If you look at what's happened since Trump took office, the war in Gaza has escalated horrifically. We've seen the worst kinds of violations of humanitarian law in Gaza in terms of cutting off all assistance since Trump took office. We've seen an escalation of Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine since Trump took office. And now we see something that hasn't happened. I mean, even despite the acrimony between President Obama and Bibi Netanyahu, this didn't happen when President Obama was in office. So what you're seeing is kind of the world's strongmen feeling like they have a permission slip to do what they want while Trump is in office. And if Marco Rubio wants to say that somehow this isn't our problem, never mind the fact that, yes, U.S. forces, U.S. facilities are in danger if Iran decides to kind of go all in with a conflict mentality. But even without that, price of oil is going to go up tomorrow. The instability in the region is going to go up tomorrow. The risk of a wider conflict is going to go up tomorrow. All of those things are going to happen. And they have no plan to deal with it. I mean, what is their strategy was to send Steve Witkoff tomorrow to try to negotiate a deal with the Iranians, and they just got bombed. So these people, either have no idea what they're doing, or they're just telling us one thing while something entirely different is happening.
As someone who's been, in the Situation Room, who's been through, tense negotiations, like what has to happen now, right? Because, I mean, again, it really matters the details here, and I want to stress this to people watching this program. We've tried to be transparent about what we do and do not know, right? How big the attack is, how Iran reads the attack in terms of the kind of game theory decision-making between the two entities, about how big of an escalation it is, what they're going to do in response. But what would the kind of, normal role for the U.S. or necessary role for the U.S. to play in the wake of something like this that could really lead to something genuinely, quite catastrophic?
So there's a number of questions, and we should actually take a minute, Chris, to go through them. The first is, what has been targeted, or what is going to be targeted, because we don't know how ongoing the strike is. Are nuclear facilities being targeted? Are personalities associated with the Iranian nuclear program being targeted? Are other Iranian military bases being targeted? We don't know how broad this strike is. If it's a broad strike, it is quite possible that the Iranians will feel compelled to respond significantly, either with ballistic missile and other kinds of attacks on Israel, or potentially mobilizing their proxies in places like Iraq and across the region to strike at not just Israel, but potentially U.S. targets. So the first question is, how broad is the Israeli strike? The second question is, what is the Iranian response? I've looked at a lot of war games over the years, Chris, involving these types of scenarios. The United States usually gets drawn into the conflict, because if there's a significant Iranian response, then the U.S. kind of comes to the defense of Israel, or the U.S. feels compelled to respond if we are attacked. And so people should be aware that if this is a larger scale attack by Israel with a larger scale attack from Iran, there's a possibility that the U.S. gets drawn into this, even if that's not what the Trump administration wants. Now, if that doesn't happen, if this is more surgical, if this is more targeted, and if the kind of dust settles, then the question is, how do you de-escalate this situation? Can you possibly negotiate a deal with the Iranians right after they've been bombed? That's going to be difficult for the Iranians, given their kind of ethos of resistance. But I think the Trump administration will be looking to protect U.S. facilities in the region. And they've already moved a lot of Americans out of the region, but they'll look to protect U.S. facilities. You'll have U.S. allies in the Gulf who have vulnerable oil fields that have been targeted by Iran in the past. They will want military assistance as well. That's going to be part of this equation. And really, the U.S. interest here is going to be, how do I stop this from becoming a wider war?
Yeah.
How do I get this back on a de-escalatory track where there's some diplomacy? If you cannot do that, you could have a wider war. And if you have a wider war, Israel could be compelled to move towards some kind of regime change effort against the Iranians. And then you really are looking at, a Iraq war type scenario where this could get truly out of hand.
All right, Ben Rhodes, who has a lot of experience and expertise that hard-earned, particularly on this specific conflict and axes of relationships. Ben, thank you so much for making time last minute.
Thanks, Chris.
Masha Gessen is an opinion columnist in the New York Times who recently warned of, quote, the beautiful danger of normal life during an autocratic rise. And Masha, again, this has been a little bit of an insane day, and reached out to you to speak initially about what happened this morning, which I'd like to talk to you about. The sort of spectacle of a U.S. senator being pushed around and brought to the ground and handcuffed. And this following, and I think the context here strikes me as important because I'd like to hear what you have to say. We've now seen this several times. We've seen the mayor of Newark arrested. We've seen a member of Congress manhandled and then ultimately indicted. We've now seen a U.S. senator. And I think there's some part of me that can say, well, in each circumstance, there was a misunderstanding or things got out of control. But as someone who has written about authoritarian normalization, what does it feel like to you?
Oh, this feels very bad. And it feels very advanced. It was years before Putin started arresting elected officials. In fact, I think it was more than 20 years before the first elected official was arrested in Russia. Because, we think that it's not just that there's the sort of perception that elected officials have higher status, but they are actually representatives of the people. Right? Each of such arrest, each such assault is an assault and an insult to a very large number of people. And so the fact that Trump is communicating and his administration is communicating, I don't care who you are. I'm going to bring you to your knees, no matter whether you are somewhat accommodating, like Governor Newsom of California, or you're rebellious, like the mayor of Newark. I'm going to bring you to your knees because I'm asserting absolute power.
There's the argument that people have made, and I've seen reporting indicating from the Secret Service that he wasn't wearing the pin that identified him, or they didn't know who he was. Again, these sort of particularities. You seem nonplussed by that.
Well, when we get, you hear the language, right? What if I'm not carrying my passport?
Right.
Right. This is the kind of distinctions that we're making. You don't have to prove that you have the right to be here and the right to speak in order to avoid being arrested. The fact that he's an elected official exacerbates the situation, but if he were anybody, it would actually be horrific.
You have, I'm not going to ask you about the details of the strikes that just happened because you, like me, were just learning about it. And having read and followed your work for many years, you are extremely fastidious and careful about what you do and don't opine on. But I am going to ask you about the broader context here. I mean, you have written about the region and also about this sort of the kind of international dimensions of the kind of authoritarian creep that we're seeing. I mean, I think it, obviously in the case of specifically Vladimir Putin's Russia, there was, specific foreign policy outcomes there and terrorist attacks that he used to consolidate power. And what you think it means for the country's international role to have this democratic decline happening in front of all the world to see?
Well, I think that I'm not sure that the democratic decline is itself sort of an enabling factor, but it is something to emulate. Not that Bibi Netanyahu needs a lot of it. Basically go exactly as far as they're going to be allowed to go.
Masha Gessen, who I thank you so much for your patience tonight, and thank you so much for your patience tonight, and also for your writing recently, which has been really important. Appreciate it.
Israel's preemptive strike on Iran, timed just as U.S. diplomats fly in for peace talks, proves one thing. Trump's foreign policy is a flaming wreck. No coordination, no control, no plan. Netanyahu acts unilaterally, and Trump shrugs. This is what happens when diplomacy is torched and chaos is invited to lead. This is what authoritarianism looks like. From Los Angeles to Tehran, power is being abused, and democracy is under siege. What happened to Senator Alex Padilla on U.S. soil should terrify every American who still believes in the rule of law. A sitting U.S. senator, peacefully identifying himself, clearly saying his name and position, was tackled, handcuffed, and silenced by agents acting under the authority of Trump's Department of Homeland Security, not for disrupting a meeting, not for violence, but for asking a question. Let that sink in. Kristi Noem, standing like a dictator's envoy at a DHS press conference, proclaimed that the federal government is not going away and will liberate Los Angeles from socialist leadership. That is not the language of public service. That is the language of occupation, of ideological warfare against elected American officials. Noem sounded less like a cabinet secretary and more like a military general preparing to depose a local government. And that's exactly what they tried to do. They deployed the National Guard without the governor's approval. They sent in federal agents without transparency. And when an elected official, the senator from California no less, dared to question the rationale, they tackled him, handcuffed him, and then lied about it on national television. This wasn't a mistake. It was a test, a show of force, a message. Because if they can do it to Senator Padilla in broad daylight, with cameras rolling, imagine what they're doing off camera to undocumented workers, janitors, students, and families just trying to live their lives. Senator Elizabeth Warren said it clearly. This isn't about mistaken identity or protocols. This is about criminalizing dissent and humiliating oversight. And the lies didn't stop with the arrest. Noem claimed Padilla lunged at her. The video shows otherwise. He clearly states, "I am Senator Alex Padilla." The real aggression came from the agents, who never identified themselves, who escalated a peaceful question into a physical takedown. Meanwhile, across the globe, the Trump administration's weak, incoherent foreign policy is collapsing in real time. Israel launched a preemptive strike on Iran without US involvement or even proper coordination, just as Trump's envoy was headed to the region for nuclear negotiations. This is chaos. The kind of chaos that happens when a president tears up a working nuclear deal, abandons multilateral diplomacy, and gives authoritarian allies free rein to act without restraint. Netanyahu didn't just bomb Iran, he bombed any chance of diplomacy. He humiliated the Trump administration's already flimsy efforts at engagement. And Trump responded with silence and weakness. Marco Rubio's statement essentially boiled down to, "We weren't involved. Don't hit us. That's not leadership. That's surrender." Let's be clear. Israel has a right to defend itself, but this wasn't about defense. This was about showmanship and distraction, about asserting dominance, not de-escalating conflict. And once again, Trump's reckless abandonment of Obama-era diplomacy has led us straight back to the brink of war. Senator Warren nailed it. When we had a deal, we had oversight. When Trump tore it up, we lost visibility. And now we're paying the price. The truth is, whether it's in Los Angeles or the Middle East, the pattern is the same. Trump enables authoritarians, empowers violence, and silences anyone who dares to challenge his narrative. Oversight becomes opposition. Protest becomes treason. Asking questions becomes a criminal act. And if we don't speak out, if we normalize this behavior, then this isn't just about Padilla or Iran. It's about the collapse of democratic accountability, at home and abroad. We are witnessing, in real time, a full court press against the very institutions meant to keep power in check. Trump's America is one where a US senator is tackled while ICE raids restaurants, where liberation means suppression, and where the world burns while our leaders refresh Twitter. This is not normal. This is authoritarianism, unmasked, unrepentant, and underway. And if we don't fight back now, we may not have the chance to later.